My guest today is Hannah Charman, and she has been a medical herbalist since 1999, having first become interested in alternative medicine when she used it to recover from chronic fatigue syndrome in her early teens. She specialises now in helping women who prefer or need a natural route through menopause, combining herbal medicine with health coaching and or hypnotherapy. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm so excited that you're here, and I'm really pleased to finally be talking about medical herbalism on the podcast because it's a topic I've not covered before. And I know you're really, really passionate about it and very, very knowledgeable. So, first of all, I'd like to ask you, what is a medical herbalist?
A medical herbalist is a person who treats illness with herbal medicines. The medical bit comes into us having some crossover with mainstream medical training, which not all herbalists have. So we do a lot of the same sorts of modules that a GP would do in their training. We do anatomy and physiology. We have clinical skills, so we can do clinical examinations. We can do blood test interpretation, counselling skills, diagnostic skills, etc. So coming to see us can be a little bit like coming to see a GP, but obviously we treat illness and health issues in a very different way. Medical herbalist is not a protected title in the same way that doctor is. So any of you could go out tomorrow, call yourself medical herbalist without any training, and you wouldn't be breaking any laws. So if you are thinking of working with a medical herbalist,
Ooh.
I would just say to do your due diligence first.
I think that's really important as well because I think a lot of people are very skeptical about herbalism, aren't they? And that's very interesting to hear that actually anybody can call themselves that.
There is a flip side to it. I should add actually that we were going to be state regulated by the government from April 2012 or 2011, I think, after a year of consultation. So in the end, they decided not to state regulate us because our safety record was so good they couldn't justify the cost. So there you go.
Wow.
I would say if you're thinking of working with a medical herbalist, go for one who is a member of a governing body like the National Institute of Medical Herbalists, because then if you have cause for complaint, they'll help you deal with that complaint. And you can also be sure that they've had a good standard of training. They abide by a code of ethics, they do their CPD, and they're insured.
And can you tell me about the process that how you decided to train as a medical herbalist?
Um, Serendipity did it, really. I basically found myself beyond the help of mainstream medicine when I was 14. And I got chronic fatigue syndrome. It came on very quickly in about 5 minutes. I went from being a perfectly happy, healthy schoolgirl to not being able to get out of the car on the way home from school. And the doctor took one look at me. My dad literally held me up to get me into the surgery because I could barely walk. And the doctor kind of spoke over me to my dad and said, "Oh, she's clearly got a problem with school. You need to get her to an educational psychologist." And he looked at me and said, "And you need to get back to school." And that was it. That was all the help we were going to get from the NHS. So thankfully, I got taken to see some different alternative therapists. None of them were herbalists at the time, interestingly, but I saw a homeopathic doctor. And later I saw a hypnotherapist. And my mum and dad were so impressed with the hypnotherapy that they went on and trained. They both quit their jobs and trained as hypnotherapists, which is what first kind of kindled my interest in hypnotherapy, because I used to go up and be the guinea pig for them to practice on at college. And then it just worked out that I got this interest in herbs from somewhere. I think they were probably calling me. And at the same time, there was a degree course in Western herbal medicine getting set up at Middlesex University. And so I managed to get onto that, and the rest is history, really.
Wow. And I know that you've combined the herbalism with the hypnotherapy so that you can combine both the physical and the emotional within your work, haven't you?
Yeah, I've always been very interested in hypnotherapy, even before I came to herbs. So it was always going to be part of the plan, but it took me about 30 years to find the right training and the right person to teach me. That's a whole other story. But I think it's important to look at these things truly holistically. So I was getting patients come to see me and they were taking their herbs, but they weren't really getting better in the way that we expected or as fast as we expected. So it turned out that actually they were having their herbs, but they were still hating their job. They were still going to bed really late every night. They were still having like takeaway for tea. And those basics of good health were just not there, which is why I brought the health coaching in. Just not just to support their immediate recovery, but to help protect their health long term as well. And the results really improved very quickly when I started bringing that in. But then with the hypnotherapy, there's obviously, menopause affects us in different ways. And sometimes you can get resurfacing trauma. Sometimes you've got a lot of grief coming up, and a lot of other emotional stuff that, the quickest and most straightforward way to address for me is hypnotherapy, because it works very fast. It's also a really interesting journey of discovery. Once you start connecting with your subconscious and your patterns, it's, very insightful, shall we say.
It sounds absolutely fascinating, actually. I mean, I'm a very big fan of anything that's holistic, because we can't separate off one bit of us from another bit of us, and
No.
we can't separate out our history as well and our emotions. You say that, trauma tends often to resurface in midlife. It's this sensitive time, and suddenly, we're having to face things that we may not have dealt with in the past. So it's very powerful.
It is. I've been working with a lady recently, actually, and she was fine one day, and the next day just had the most horrendous anxiety and depression out of nowhere. And when we delved a bit deeper, there was a lot of childhood trauma that corresponded with the sorts of symptoms she was getting and when she was getting them. So that's always something to have at the back of your mind, I think, if you're getting sort of really severe mental health symptoms and you've no idea where they're coming from and they don't appear to be cyclical. You could maybe ponder the trauma aspects of it.
It's so important. Yeah, that's a lot of increasingly what I'm looking at, in work that I do and conversations that I have, is the role of trauma in our midlife experience of menopause, especially, and this hormonal change that comes on us.
Well, and it goes back as well. It corresponds with the traditional view of menopause, whereby it's a big clear out. It's a consolidation and a clear out of all the old stuff. So you're getting rid of people, places, things, thought patterns that no longer serve you, because you've got to repackage yourself for the later stage of your life. So it's fascinating to see how, what we've known about it traditionally does actually play out, and the mechanisms behind that is quite interesting.
And so many people just ignore that, don't they? They ignore it and they want a quick fix, and they don't appreciate, I think, that there is so much more behind the scenes going on for us that we need to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, this is partly what I do with my groups and my one-to-one patients is, try and just put your physical symptoms to one side for a moment and see the bigger picture here. You've got as far as menopause in the first place, which is an achievement. I didn't know, but we have a 1 in 14 trillion chance of being born, which to me is like mind-blowing. And then to kind of get this far, where our forebears probably wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
Statistically, if you'd been around a couple of 100 years ago, you wouldn't have got to this age. Or it would have been unlikely. The odds would have been against you with childbirth and healthcare as it was in those days. So to actually make it as far as menopause in the first place is quite an honour, I think. Might not feel like it always, but
I agree.
a lot of
I
women
think it's
don't get
cause
that
for
far.
celebration.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's a lot of gifts that come with menopause as well as the curses, I think, and we need to be talking more about the gifts.
So what do you see as the gifts?
I see, well, the biggest one for me so far as being just not caring what other people think. I love it. It's so liberating. I've spent my entire life worrying about what other people think of me, and now that's just subsiding, and I'm sort of coming into my own a bit more. And also my crone self comes to visit every now and again, which is really lovely. And she gives me a little pearl of wisdom, and then she goes off to wherever she is the rest of the time. And I'm just like, oh, please stay. I want more of that. But she's like, you wait. The best is yet to come. You wait to see what's coming next. I'm like, I want to know. So that's really lovely. That's, you know, a more kind of intuitive spiritual awakening, which is really lovely. But I think it's something that we kind of grow into as we move through the process, but it's really nice to experience that side of it. So yeah, what about you? What have been your gifts?
The gift, oh, this is my podcast. What are you doing
I
asking me the
know, but
questions?
can you just like do a little bit?
Well, I often feel like I'm the big menopause defender, and now
Mm,
I'm the big menopause celebrator, because I mean, you know, I'm way past menopause.
hmm.
And I love it. I love who I am now. I love the fact that I think I have more focus.
Mm,
Um, I have different energy. So I wouldn't say
exactly.
I have more energy, but I have different
Mm,
energy. I have energy for different things, and that
yeah.
excites me.
Mm,
I also don't give a flying monkey's uncle anymore what people
it's
think about
lovely,
me, and
isn't it?
I'm much more able. It's brilliant. I'm much more able to put across my point of view, and do what I do. Do this, you know. I mean, I
Yeah.
would never have done a podcast before. I would never have written a book before, you know.
No,
Whereas now I can do that, and I think it's brilliant. I think,
I
and,
love it.
and
It's almost,
that's why I do what I do, because
yeah,
I want to tell the world.
exactly. It's like you've got a new mission, but at the same time, it's like
Yeah,
you're going back to your child self. You know, the pure, genuine, authentic you that you were when you were a kid before you had to pay mortgages and cook teas every night and run kids around. And
and I had lots of estrogen,
exactly,
which I called the biddable hormone. Yeah,
yeah,
which makes you behave and,
yeah,
you
exactly.
know, look after everybody
And
else.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And it's nice to kind of go back to your authentic self a bit more.
Mm. And even, you know, find your authentic self. Because
Mm.
I don't think I knew who I was pre-puberty. I don't really have many memories of me pre-puberty.
Mm.
So for me, it's more, it's finding myself, finding who I actually really am now,
Yeah, yeah,
which
absolutely.
is
It's
great.
lovely. It's not all lovely, but the the deeper bit is lovely.
Mm, mm, yeah. I'd just like to jump back to your childhood and ask you, did you find out what caused the chronic fatigue syndrome? Did you find out why that happened to you?
Yeah, it took a while, but this I have seen this in other chronic fatigue syndrome patients. So it's I call it like a dopamine addiction, where it's an addiction to achievement, and often the drive for that comes from one or both parents never acknowledging your achievements, never praising. It was my dear mum, bless her, she can't help it. Even now, she can't help it. And I realise it's her thing and her backstory that's responsible for that, and it's not me. But yeah, it was oh, she didn't notice that I've just got an A in my French test. I must try harder next time, and maybe then she'll be pleased. And so it goes on and on and on. And in the end, you fall over and you have to rethink. Um, so, yeah, that's where that came from. And I still have that drive, but I have it for different reasons. And I have safety valves, I have early warnings that I pay attention to and don't let myself go down that road again.
I'm trying to think of the name of the man who has written the book, and the book that I literally was my book of the year last year, and I can't currently think of it, but he talks about the personality profile of people who have things like chronic fatigue syndrome, and that
Oh,
this people pleasing, this is very much a part of that profile. Have you read his work? Do you know who I'm thinking of?
no,
Can't think
but
what's
I
his
would love
name. This is
to.
ridiculous. It'll come to me.
It will come to you, but when it does,
Um,
let me know and I'll read it because when I trained in
yes.
Reiki back in the early 90s, my Reiki master used to teach metaphysics as part of the Reiki training and talk about different personality types versus the sorts of things they might manifest, and different, even sort of different things going on in your life and how that might play out as an illness or injury, which was really interesting. But I think Louise Hay did a massive experiment about that in the early 80s with tens of thousands of people and started to unpick that a little bit. But I've never been able to find any sort of solid evidence of it.
I'm going to have to find out. I'm going to have to look on my phone now. I'll ask you another question. You can chat away, and I'll see if I can find it because
Okay.
it's on my Kindle,
Oh,
and
okay.
it's just gone out of my head. Um, but and yeah, as I say, it was my top book from last year,
Oh, okay.
and I've so quickly forgotten it. The Myth of Normal,
Oh, okay.
Gabor Mate.
I love him.
So Gabor Mate, yes, and The Myth of Normal is absolutely brilliant. So listeners, if you haven't read my blog post about the over 36 books I think that I read last year, this was my book of the year, The Myth of Normal. And he looks at so many different aspects of disease and what is wrong with us personally, wrong with us at a community level,
Hmm.
at a national level, at a world level. And
Yeah.
it's like this, it's definitely, the work of his life. It's the culmination of all of his research and everything, but it's absolutely brilliant. But it really looks in detail and shows some research in terms of the different kinds of conditions that often afflict women more than men, and looks at why that's the case and what are that they have noticed there are certain personality traits that go along with these conditions. Absolutely fascinating.
Oh, I'll have to read that. He's
So I
coming to
really
my imaginary
recommend that.
dinner party.
Ah, yes, it's mine too,
Yes,
definitely.
I love him.
So, how do herbal medicines work, and especially for menopause?
There's a question. We know a bit about how they work, but we don't know everything. So, the principle of herbal treatment as I work is that we're treating the whole person. So, we're never just treating the hot flushes, we're never just treating the brain fog. We're looking at that person as a whole and how different influences might be impacting that and their bigger health picture. So, often I find, for example, that there's a long history of gynae issues. You know, the periods have never been quite right, or the digestion's never been quite right, or there's some kind of inflammatory patterns going on behind the scenes. And then sometimes in terms of lifestyle, we all do it, don't we? We're all a bit sleep deprived by the time we reach menopause. We're all a bit overworked, a bit overstressed. We might not have really taken care of our nutrition properly. It's not a criticism of anyone because we all do it. It's life these days. But that does have an impact on menopause, inevitably, because we're on a back foot. It's actually quite a big ask of your body to make that transition. It needs to do a lot to get you from A to B. And if it doesn't have those resources available, it will struggle and it will complain in the form of symptoms. So it's unpicking all that really, and then using the herbs a bit like a mechanic with a car, just to sort of tweak and nudge and support and get those processes working at full capacity again. So typically in a herbal prescription, I would start with a very sort of base level, and I'd be looking at things like gut health, chronic inflammation, etc., and putting some herbs in for that. And then I would use what we call nervines and adaptogens, because there are very close correlations, because your adrenal glands are dealing with your stress day to day and you're pumping out stress hormones all the time. But they're also the bit that takes over the production of certain hormones after your ovaries shut down. So we really need to look after the stress aspect of it with herbs. So I use adaptogens, which help your body out of a chronic stress response. Even if you're still living a really stressful life, it won't have as big an impact on you if you're taking adaptogens. And nervines work hand in hand with those. So they work directly on the nervous system. So ones you might have heard of would be things like chamomile or lemon balm or valerian or passion flower, St. John's wort, those sorts of herbs. Then we can put the next layer on, which is the herbs that actually influence hormone balance. So they might be ones that contain phytoestrogens, for example, which help to have a balancing effect on the way your own estrogen behaves. And there are other herbs which don't contain those, which is really important for ladies worried about cancer to know, is that not all herbs that we use for menopause and hormone balance contain phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens are generally safe for women who've got cancer or had cancer, contrary to popular belief. That's what the research is saying now and has done for a while. There are exceptions, and you would really need to sort of work with someone properly if you're in that situation. However, there are other herbs that we can use if you are still nervous about using phytoestrogens, which will help to influence the way you're making your own hormones. And then there's the other end to it as well, because it's not just about making the hormones, it's about clearing out the used hormones effectively too, so that you're not getting a backlog. And then finally, like the cherry on top, are the herbs that are specific for different symptoms. So that's their specific superpower. So we've got some for hot flushes, some for brain fog, some for palpitations, and so on. So it's a really lovely way of working because you're in charge of your own treatment. If you've got 20 different symptoms going on, we can say, well, where would you like to start? What's your priority? And then we build the prescription around that. And then when that starts to get better, we can adjust the prescription accordingly and work in order of priority. So it's very empowering for you to be completely in charge of your own treatment. And the other nice thing is that it's not forever. Herbs are just sort of readjusting you effectively so that you can work optimally again. And you don't need to take the herbs indefinitely like you would some other treatments.
And I think it's such a shame that because we've medicalized what is a very natural transition, we've moved away from these more natural ways that historically society has used. And we also forget that so many medicines, I mean, yes, they're synthesized now, but they come from plants, don't they? Originally, a lot of medicines come from plants.
Most HRT now, something like 95% of it, comes from Mexican wild yam. Both progesterone and estrogen preparations come from that herb. That's the main reason why it's grown nowadays. But there's still this thinking that, HRT is highly effective, herbs not so much, which is not true at all. Actually, those of us who use herbs know how powerful they are, know how safe and gentle they can be, and how versatile they are. And people say, well, there's no evidence for herbs. It's like, but there is evidence for herbs. Go and have a look. Go on PubMed, go on Google Scholar. There is evidence for herbs. It's just one of these things that people say parrot fashion because they've been told to say that probably, and never really properly checked out for themselves, but there is evidence.
Yeah, as a student of the Chinese language, I get so frustrated when anybody says, or I read, there's no evidence for Chinese medicine. And I just think, well, actually, there's 2,000 years, okay?
Yeah.
There's no randomized control trial, no. But there's 2,000 years of efficacy. And if it didn't work, guess what? It would have changed. It wouldn't be going on for that long.
Well, yeah. And
I get very frustrated by things like that.
Yeah, there's the other aspect to it as well, which we sort of touched on a bit before, where, unfortunately with menopause now, it's become such a hot topic, if you'll excuse the pun, that like everything that's going on at the moment, it's becoming quite divisive, and you're either in one camp or the other camp. And if you're in one camp, you don't want the other camp having much credibility. So in order to help that along a bit, we debunk herbal medicine. But that's not fair, because that's actually misleading, particularly for those women who would really even find herbal medicine life-saving at times. You know, if you've got horrendous menopause symptoms and you can't use the treatments that other women can use for medical reasons, and you're suicidal and you're having to, you know, one lady I heard of, bless her, was trying to have to sleep on a trampoline all night in the garden, slept on her daughter's trampoline because her flushes were that bad she couldn't sleep indoors. You know, there are women who are on cancer medication who are taking themselves off the cancer medication so that they can have other treatments for their menopause. And this is wrong. You know, this is not right. And to suppress information that might help and benefit these people is really sad. So thank goodness for people like you.
I think it's just so important that we discuss all of the tools in the toolkit, you know, and you know, I'm always saying I'm an interesting case because I took HRT because of my early menopause diagnosis, but then I came off it at what I considered to be so-called average age of menopause in the West, which is, I was told, 51. And that was the advice I was given then, you know, stay on it until 51, then come off it. And I did that. And I think looking back, I perhaps wouldn't have done that. I would have explored other things, but I went along with it then. But then, you know, I now am always talking about, you know, phytoestrogens, I think are so powerful. And, you know, I have flaxseed every day. And I think it's really interesting as well, because I have friends who've had breast cancer scares and they're nervous about having the flaxseed. They're nervous about having the soy. But I find it really interesting, you know, again, as a student of Chinese, if you look at China, when I was in China in the late 80s, breast cancer was described as the rich woman's disease. And in China, there was very little prevalence of breast cancer, even though they ate loads and loads of soy, you know, loads of soy, far more than anywhere else in the world. And it wasn't until they started to adopt a more Western diet, and specifically dairy, that their rates of breast cancer started to increase. And it's things like this that just don't get any airtime. You know, nobody's talking about those things. And it really frustrates me, because there's so much that we can learn from other cultures. There's so much that we can learn from tradition, you know, like herbal medical, you know, solutions. And it's just, it doesn't suit us. It doesn't help us to put the blinkers on and say, no, this is the way we've got to do it because this is the way we're being told. No, it's such a broad field. There's so much to learn.
There is. And it's not just tradition as well. You know, there has been research, for example, into dementia. If you look on the dementia charity websites, you'll see that numerous studies have shown that if you exercise for 30 minutes a day, you reduce your risk of dementia by 30 to 40% just by exercising.
That's incredible.
Similar studies for social isolation. If you get out every now and again and have a good laugh with your friends, you're massively reducing your risk of dementia. And it's simple things. Basically, what they're saying is the further we stray from our natural state as tribal human beings, the more likely we are to suffer, particularly in old age, but throughout our life as well. If we eat, you know, junk food instead of proper food, if we isolate ourselves instead of socializing, if we sit at our desks all day instead of getting out and doing some activity, we will suffer for it, because we are not designed to live that way. And it's really interesting. It doesn't matter what angle you look at it from. You can look at it from a nutrigenomics angle or a herbal medicine angle or a conventional medicine angle. It doesn't matter. You basically need to live like we were designed to live. And there is so much more to post-menopausal health, to dementia, to osteoporosis, heart disease, and all the others than just one aspect. You know, that you need to, again, look at the bigger picture and be a bit objective as well. And don't believe everything you're reading and being told. You know, use your common sense. Look around you. You know, well, Are all the older women that I know suffering with dementia, osteoporosis, and heart disease? Because I know loads who are in pretty good health, actually, well into their 80s, sometimes 90s or hundreds. So there's clearly more to it than we're being told, isn't there? And the evidence is there. You just have to go
Yes.
out and find it.
Yeah. And you have to find trustworthy sources.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's, but it's really difficult. I was interviewing somebody yesterday, and we were talking about how there are so many different opinions now, and that women can get into this analysis paralysis because, like,
Yeah.
they're being bombarded with
Mm-hmm.
information, and some of it can be diametrically opposed. So
Yeah.
it's so important to just stay curious, isn't it? So important.
Yeah, but use your own observations. Look around you, look at what you're experiencing and your family are experiencing and your friends, and just try and piece it together a little bit. But there's always layers and layers. I always say the more I learn, the more I realise I need to learn. You know.
Oh, me too. The more I learn, the more I don't know. I
Exactly.
realise
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
nice.
And I think actually that tells me when somebody's absolutely categorical about something, it makes me go, well, hang on a minute. No, I don't agree. I don't think there is space for you to be categorical about that. Where's that information coming from?
And there's no need for it either. What's wrong
Mm.
with just having a grown up discussion, looking at different opinions? I don't know. It's just not
I
what
heard you say
people want to do.
something. Yeah, I know. People, yeah. I think as well, I feel with HRT now, it's almost like it's become a magic pill for our stressful lives. So if we want to continue to live life as
Mm-hmm.
we've been doing, even though our body is rebelling and telling us
Yeah.
that all is not right, I think there's a sense that if I take the HRT, I can carry on as I was and I'll be all right.
Yeah.
And actually we don't know if we're going to be all right, and B, why do we want to depend on a medication to enable a lifestyle which is inherently unhealthy?
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, we don't like to be at all uncomfortable nowadays, do we? If we get a bit of a
No.
headache, we pop a paracetamol and we get on with our day. And actually, we've got loads of interventions in childbirth and all the other things, all the other sort of pain points in our life. So we don't want to be uncomfortable. We don't see any value in being uncomfortable, where I actually think there's huge value in being uncomfortable. And a lot to be said for really experiencing menopause if you can. Obviously, if it's completely disrupted your life and you're having a horrific time, that's different. But to me, I get a few nights every now and again where I don't sleep terribly well and it's uncomfortable. But I feel like it's character building. It's what, your nan and granddad used to say, oh, that's character building. And it is. And actually, menopause to me is an initiation. And I was talking to a
Yeah.
druid friend of mine and saying, do you know any religions or any spiritual belief systems where they have a ritual for menopause? And she said, no, we don't have one in Druidism. She said, but we kind of make it up as we go along in Druidism. And if someone wants a ritual for that, they can have one. We write it for them. So they're not allowed to write it for themselves. Someone else has to write it for them. She said, always there has to be a challenge because you need to earn your initiation. And I'm like, well, that's menopause, isn't it? You have to earn your crown. And, sometimes enduring a little bit of discomfort is a good thing, I think.
I
Keeps
think there
things in
are
perspective.
rituals
Yeah.
in other cultures. I think there are rituals in other cultures, but they're few and far between, because
Yeah.
still the gendered ageism makes it something that is seen as being shameful rather than to be celebrated. And I'm desperately trying to change that, because I just think, I think menopausal women are just the bee's knees. I really
Well,
do, And
I wonder if that's
post-menopause,
part of
we're
the problem.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I think we could be a force to be
The
reckoned with.
patriarchy doesn't like us. Yeah, and the
Precisely.
patriarchy doesn't know what to do with us.
So what's the
Hmm.
solution? Tell us we're all broken. Tell us we're going to be crumbling in a nursing
Yes.
home by the time we're 70. And here's the fix. And then that's sorted. That's got rid of them. They'll be fine now. They'll keep quiet.
Yeah.
They've got their estrogen hit and they'll be nice
We've
again now.
kept them the same as they were
Yeah.
when they were reproductive. And what's
But I
their
do,
role if they're not reproductive?
well, also, like we said, estrogen makes you nice. Estrogen makes you tolerant.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
keeps you calm. It makes you run around and people please. And
Yep.
look at what's going on in the world at the moment. The last
I
thing they
know.
want is an army of empowered menopausal women going, no, there's a much better
Enough
way.
already! You've made such a mess!
Yes, let us sort all this out. They don't want that.
Mm.
I think that's part of the problem. We're
Yeah,
being
I do
fed this
too.
constant narrative of you're broken.
We're
You
broken.
cannot get through this alone. You need our intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And
And it
I
has to
think
be
we
a
need to,
medical solution, because that'll make us more money.
it will make them more money. It will make us more compliant and quiet and dependent and disempowered. Everyone's a winner apart from us. So there
Which
you
is
go.
why also I get very incensed by the narrative that having access to HRT is about women's empowerment, because actually it's not.
It's the opposite.
It's just maintaining the status quo, i.e. it's keeping us with a similar hormonal profile to what we had as reproductive women. It is negating this third stage of our lives as a post-reproductive woman, which is hopefully a very long period of our life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
it's
regular listeners will have heard me rant about that on many an occasion, so apologies.
well, I think in a way, you can't talk about it too much. Obviously, how anyone navigates their own menopause is entirely up to them. And, people say to me, oh, you're really anti-HRT. And I'm not anti-HRT at all. I would prefer it
No, and
if
I'm
it
not either.
if
I'm
it didn't
not.
come with that
No.
narrative, and I would prefer it if it was perhaps prescribed a little bit more wisely. But I honestly, anyone I know who's going through menopause is fine by me to do whatever they want. It's their choice. My choice is mine. Theirs is theirs. But I think we need to be really clear on what is the best choice for us and ready to change our minds if, the path we've chosen doesn't seem to be working out. By all means, change your mind and try something else. But do we want to be disempowered and dependent, or do we want to be empowered and kicking ass? I know what I want to do.
Yeah. And there's an environmental impact as well, isn't there?
Yeah. We're actually all taking HRT anyway, whether we want to or not. It's in the tap water. I'm like, there's no escape, really, one way or another, is there? But we can only do what we can do. We can make our wisest decisions with whatever we've got, and that's all anyone can do.
But what is the impact of that? The hormones in the water supply.
There's controversy over it being there in the first place, as you'd expect. But, most of us are estrogen dominant, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. It's partly due to lifestyle and diet, partly due to xenoestrogens in plastics and foods and so on, and in the tap water. So you're being fed a constant stream of estrogen when your body is designed to ebb and flow, which is another thing. Estrogen's great, but it ebbs and flows naturally. It's not a constant. And, you know, we have seen a rise in estrogen receptive cancers. And maybe that's part of the reason why. We might never know. It's very difficult to find any real accurate information on it, as you'd expect. But, you know, maybe that's got something to do with it.
And girls are going through puberty so much earlier, aren't they?
Yeah.
I'm always curious about that. Why is that happening? It has to be something that we've done to change
Yeah.
the environment in which they are growing.
I mean, we would naturally excrete some estrogen into the water system anyway, because it would naturally be in our urine at certain times in our lives. But that's one thing. Artificial hormones, not just from HRT, but from hormonal contraceptives, maybe is a bit more than we were designed to deal with. Anyway, this could get depressing because there's nothing we can do about it. Is there really?
So how do you encourage let's change tack. How do you encourage your patients to see their menopause?
I think it really is how the individual is experiencing the menopause. Like some of the ladies I work with, their anxiety is so severe, their depression is so severe. I can't say, oh, but just embrace your goddess. You know, embrace your crew. You see the gifts in it, because there's no way they're going to do that. We need to work on the physical first and calm everything down and look for the good stuff later. Maybe there's always good stuff to be found. Like we said, just getting to menopause in the first place, at least you're still here, you know, and at least you're having a natural menopause at the time when most women have. Whereas, you know, if you'd had a ovarian cancer in your 20s, that's your fertile life gone in the blink of an eye. You're in menopause in your 20s and you can't have children. And if you're one of those ladies who wanted more than anything else to have a baby, that's shipped sails in your 20s. That's awful. You know, so it's keeping it in perspective. And when we're ready, we look at the gifts.
And changing tack a little bit again, what other conditions do you find that herbal medicine is particularly effective for?
I mean, you can use herbal medicine for pretty much anything. You can use it in first aid. If you go to the festivals in the summer, there's often a herbal first aid station there where they treat all sorts of trench foot and all sorts of interesting things with herbs. But, you know, its real superpower is in chronic. Yeah, at Glastonbury, they treat trench foot quite frequently.
Oh my crikey, really?
Yeah. Obviously, with something like that, they would generally say go to hospital. But if that person goes, no thanks, I'm not going to hospital, then they will do their best to treat it herbally, and often they're quite successful. But anyway, its real superpower is in chronic illness. You know, the sorts of things that tend not to respond so well to mainstream treatments, and the kinds of things that many of us will get at some point or another. So, you know, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibro, obviously menopause stuff, menstrual disorders, anything, chronic allergies, migraines, IBS, those sorts of things respond really well to herbal medicine.
I noticed that it can also be used to help with blood pressure, high blood pressure. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it comes down to finding out why that's happened. But yes, it can be very effective for that. And there's, you know, if it's high stress, if it's blood pressure raising because of stress, then we would use different herbs too, if it's down to some other reason. So yeah, there's lots you can do. I could tell you many tales about miraculous recoveries with herbal medicine. There's quite a few on my website actually, but I can regale many all day. I can regale you with tales of how people have made miraculous recoveries with herbal medicine. I see miracles in my practice every day.
Sounds fascinating.
They're no less miraculous.
Really?
Yeah. I love my job. as you probably
That's fun. It
gathered.
must be really empowering. Yeah, your passion is very obvious. Yeah, it's
Well,
great.
it's unusual for me
Wonderful.
to stick to one thing for more
Congratulations.
than 5 minutes. And it's been 25 years this year.
Really.
So, yeah, yeah. It's the only thing I've stuck to for 25 years, definitely.
Good for you. So, as we wind up, what would you most like women to know?
I would most like women to know that herbs are there for them. You know, whether they're adding some to their tea, whether they are going to grow some in the garden and learn how to use them themselves, they are a very safe, effective option. And I need to let as many women as possible just know that it's there, because they can be life saving. You know, we hear of one main treatment for menopause, and there are others that work really well. So yeah, it's a very simple thing. I just want everyone to know about herbal medicine.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow, and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife, Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.